Welcome to episode 20 of the Be Life podcast. We're so glad that you're joining us for this episode. If you enjoy what you're hearing, we'd love for you to subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This week's a little bit different. Joe is not in his normal seat. In fact, we're joined today by Jimmy Black. He's one of the pastors here at our church. Pastor Jimmy's a really smart guy. And he's a fun guy, so I'm hoping that we have some good conversation today. But Joe is away on a mission trip. He and Pastor Dan, our lead pastor, they went to Kenya, and it was a bit of an adventure. So I'm really looking forward to talking to Joe about some of those stories when he gets back, get some of his insight. But as I was talking with Jimmy this week about what we were going to discuss on the podcast this week, he had mentioned the subject of missions and how appropriate with everything that's going on with Joe being gone this week. So I thought that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really excited to talk about it because I went to Africa for a little while too. And so I try to teach them some Swahili, actually. You know, if you watch The Lion King, you already know Swahili. Do you know that?
From like the opening song?
Like Rafiki, you know, it's the little monkey. His real name is Rafiki, but it means friend, you know? Simba means lion in Swahili.
Oh, interesting.
Hakuna Matata actually means no worry because Hakuna means no.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool because the Lion King implements Swahili. So I try to teach them those things, but they didn't listen to me, I don't think.
How long ago was that you had gone to Africa on a mission
so
trip?
long ago. It feels like yesterday, but it was back when I was in college. It was my senior year. So that was like 2007-ish.
You're dating yourself there.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So I went to Kenya, but I also went to Tanzania as well. And so we spent about 3 months over there. So I did learn a lot of Swahili while I was there. So I got kind of engrossed in it and everything like that. So such a fun trip. It was. And so I hope Joe and Pastor Dan are having a great time because missions is a huge part of me and I love it so much.
Yeah. So that was a multi-month long trip. Was that your first mission trip that you had gone on?
No, I mean, you know, as a good Christian, you go to several, don't you? You have to go to one as a youth, you know,
Yeah,
when you're in high school, you go, you know, and I went to Jamaica. I've been to Jamaica probably 3 or 4 times now on mission trips. And each one's been kind of different. So it's really exciting. I went twice when I was in high school. Then I went again in college to Jamaica. And that one I actually planned, which was really fun. And then again, Africa in college. And then I went back to Jamaica again with some teenagers. So, and then lately I went to Costa Rica. So I've been to many, many countries. And, you know, it's been a blast when I go on these mission trips, you know?
Yeah.
Have you been ever on a mission trip?
I've been on a number. Missions was always something that was really important at the church where I grew up. And so I've heard a lot about it. I've prayed for, given money towards, to support a lot of teams that have gone, but I've only been on a few myself. We did one to the Navajo Native American Reservation in New Mexico. That was cool because it was really surprising. It was like a third world country, even though it was still in the States. I've been to the Dominican Republic and to Santiago, Chile. So a handful of them.
I love how you said Chile because it sounds like you actually were there. Like I say Tanzania, like I was there.
Yeah.
You know, now we're locals, of course, because we were there for 3 months or
Pretty
a
much.
week, you know.
I mean, so I went with my now wife, Hannah, was my girlfriend at the time when we had gone to Chile. And she had said how much she loved it there. And she's like, wow, you know, if God calls us to go into ministry and he calls us to Chile, I'll say yes. You know, she really enjoyed it there.
I took my wife to Jamaica and she did not say the same thing. She did not. She was pregnant at the time, so that was bad timing probably. But yeah, she did not say I'll go back to Jamaica for God. She didn't. She would, but I'm just saying she didn't say that.
So most recently, your mission trip was to Costa Rica, and you, as the youth pastor, took a group of students and some adult leaders from our church for that trip. Tell us a little bit about what happened while you were on that trip.
So, I mean, Costa Rica, it was really fun because it's multi-generational that go on the trip. And so that's really fun. I've done another trip multi-generational. I feel like it's really a great time for people to bond as far as the church community goes within our own church. You know, when went to Costa Rica, I didn't know what Costa Rica was like. I didn't know what to expect. And so part of our trip, though, usually, as a youth pastor, you find a place or an organization that does it for you. Like I've gone with Praying Pelican. They're amazing, right? But this time I actually went with one of our missionaries who's Nazarene, and I just planned with him one-on-one, which was kind of cool, but the expenses were a lot lower than going through an organization. So it made it more affordable for the students to be able to go and adults.
But a lot of the work that you're paying an organization for, that work falls on you.
Yeah. So the one thing that was kind of hard was because it was just one person that we were paying, they had to wait for our money to come through before they could buy supplies. And so the supplies were about a day late than what we were there when we did some construction work. So part of me is I'm missional and I love building stuff, but I'm not good at building stuff. Yeah. So I told the missionary, I was like, I want to make half of the time evangelistic and then half the time work and construction and stuff like that. And so the really fun thing about going on that trip is meeting the people that are part of that community, because we did go to a church and we met the community, we met the church, and being able to spend time with kids and adults who are not part of the church, reaching out to them when, the church probably has tried to reach out to them, but they weren't responsive because, well, they're Costa Ricans and we're Americans. For some reason, they think higher of us, when we present the gospel than a Costa Rican, because maybe because we made the trip to say, hey, Jesus is real and he's our savior, or maybe they just thought it was fun to be around white people and they thought we were rich. I don't know what it was.
Yeah. So I've got to talk to Dan and Joe a little bit while they were there in Kenya, and they had said that a lot of the people there had never met a white person before. And so if for no other reason than it being a spectacle of someone that's completely different they've never seen before, it got their attention.
Yeah. When I was in Kenya, actually, a kid had me take my shirt off. Now, you don't want to see me take my shirt off now, but he had me take my shirt off because he was just so perplexed at my skin. But also I have freckles, so that even made it more confusing for this child. But yeah, they don't know white people in Africa mostly because they're out there. Like they just don't have contact with white people. So yeah, it's kind of cool when you meet people that don't know different things and you can introduce them to different things. One time in my trip to Jamaica, we met with a generational family. So there was a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. The mother and daughter were both blind, and then the grandmother was deaf. So and they all lived in the same household with no help, right? And so it was kind of funny how it worked, but what really was cool about it, and this is kind of silly, but like they never had Doritos before, and we gave them Doritos, and they thought we were amazing because we gave them Doritos. So it was really fun when he introduced new things to them that they never seen, and it's kind of cool to see all that. And they actually introduce you to things too that whenever you're overseas that you've never experienced before. And you get to taste and smell or whatever it might be.
Yeah, one of the most rewarding parts of growing up is getting to experience cultures outside of your own. And a mission trip, especially international mission trips, are always a great opportunity for that. You get to share a bit of your culture with someone else, and they do the same in return. And it's always something special. But I know that there's a lot of people that are able to do that sort of thing outside of mission trips. Do you feel like in the context of a missions trip, that sort of cultural exchange is different? Do you have any experience of like that cross-cultural interaction outside of mission trips?
I mean, it's not as intense, I would say, I mean, seriously, like cross-cultural, I mean, you can find that when you go to the South, when you're from the North, right? That's
true.
You can find that when you go to Kansas, when you live in Ohio, and people are saying you want a Coke and you're waiting for your Coke. And really they just mean, do you want a pop? We call it pop, So that's cross-cultural, so to speak. People go to bed certain times. They talk certain times. They talk to their parents different ways. When I lived in the South, I had to learn how to say ma'am to everyone, even if they were younger than me. I mean, that's what they say.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And
yes,
it's strange because there's certain cultures here just a few states apart where calling a young woman ma'am could be insulting.
Oh, yeah.
And then in another culture, it's expected. It's a way to show honor and respect.
Yeah. Another like a negative cross-cultural thing is when I was in the South, so I was wearing an Ohio shirt and somebody yelled at me, "Get out of here, Yankee." So that was a cross-cultural experience that I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. He was chasing me in his wheelchair. It wasn't really that much fun for me. But yeah, so I mean, when you go out to California, you got a different lifestyle that people have. And so you couldn't find that within the United States. Even if you live in cities and go to the country, you'll have a different way of life and you learn and experience different things on how people live.
Yeah. I think one of the fascinating things that I found when I went on these mission trips, like it's a lot of fun to exchange these different cultural elements, but I also found that like 80-90% of what makes them Dominican, what makes me American, it's just the same things. It's like shared human experience. Like I sometimes I think of them as being so different from me. Like they're living with a different government, perhaps different major religions in their culture, different language. They must be so different from me. But I've found time and again how much we have in common. And so I think you make a really good point about there can be such a cultural difference just here in the States. Within Ohio, we live, it's an hour up to Cleveland, or it's an hour out to the middle of farm country where there's nothing around. Mm-hmm. And there's almost, if not more, diversity between those two cultures than there is perhaps a medium-sized city here in Canton, Ohio, or a medium-sized city that's like Quilicura in Chile. And there was so much that we had in common for just as much as we had different. And so I found benefits to both, stepping outside of my comfort zone and seeing things differently, but also to recognize that even those people that are so different, people on the other side of the world, are still so similar to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever experience something that was really negative on a mission trip?
Yes. So like on a lighthearted level, I broke my toe on a mission trip. And so it's like a staple with mission trips that you go and you do a work project and you do a little bit of evangelism. Mm-hmm. You have a joint worship experience with local Christians and with the Christians that you're a part of. But then there's always a day or two that is like dedicated to fun. Mm-hmm. And so we were having our fun thing. The very next day, we were going whitewater rafting through the jungle. And I'm like, that's sweet. A once in a lifetime thing. I can't miss that. And I had broken my toe and my toenail fell out and I had this open wound and it was swollen. And they were like, hey, we really don't recommend that you go put your foot into these jungle waters. Like, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, parasites all over you, dude.
I risked it. I'm like, I could lose my foot, but like once in a lifetime opportunity. I literally took like a plastic baggie and stuck my foot into it and then put my sock on and then my shoe.
You were dedicated.
Oh,
you were dedicated.
I wasn't going to miss it. So I've had that sort of bad experience. I had some scary experiences. Mm-hmm. I think it's very isolating and it can be very terrifying to be somewhere where you don't speak the same language. Like that's something we take for granted in our culture, that we are so homogenous when it comes to our language. The expectation is any store I go into, if I need to use the bathroom, if I need a cup of water, they're going to understand me. To be somewhere where that's not the case, that's a little bit freaky.
It is.
And then probably my worst experience I had on a mission trip was going with my now wife, then girlfriend, and one of the old ladies who was with us was very upset that we were holding hands when we were out in public and that we had too much PDA or code purple as they called it. Yeah.
Too much purple.
So it was really frustrating that I was on this like spiritual high. I was like, I felt so close to God. I felt so close to my brothers and sisters in Christ in South America. And here's this woman coming along who's just picking at this thing. And it's like, man, we're trying to like God's doing something here. Mm-hmm. This is like a good experience. Like why are you nitpicking at this thing? It was really disheartening. So that's probably my worst sort of mission trip experience. Have you had?
I mean, that was just a moment though, right? I mean, it didn't ruin your whole trip, did it?
No, it didn't.
That's good.
Yeah. That's the thing, is we had to be intentional and say, we're going to move past this. There's bigger things happening.
Yeah. So. I think it's easier to do that too when, like, if you were at home and that happened, like you would just like mourn over it or whatever.
Yeah.
You just keep thinking about it over and over again. And I think there's something about when you're in a different culture and different environment, you act differently too. Yeah. Like, especially when you're on a mission trip. I'm not a very evangelic person where I go up to people, strangers, and say, "Hey, do you know Jesus? Let me show you this Jesus cube," and show them, click and clack and all that. But when I was on the mission field, like there was no fear with that. And so my character was so different, So that's cool that, you kind of got through that because, when you're on the mission field, it is usually once in a lifetime deal. You're never going to meet these people again. You're probably not. You may form a relationship maybe nowadays, which is cool, like Costa Rica. I still talk to a few people in Costa Rica through the WhatsApp, and some of the other people do too. And so there's really cool connections that we can still have. I mean, my worst experience probably was, I don't know. It wasn't, I've been scared a few times in Africa, so when you're walking through the bush, what they call it, and there's no lights around whatsoever, and you're walking through with a bunch of Africans, you don't know what's going to happen next because you're just lost in the dark. And they tell you, watch out for, animals. And you're like, oh, well, I can't see the animals. So
literally can't watch out for them.
But then one time the children's pastor, he took me into an animal sanctuary with a canoe. And he's like, let's go canoeing. He says, but do you know how to use a spear in case a crocodile comes?
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, we'll try. And so we were on the canoe, and there was a little boy who was fishing off the riverbank, and he tried to jump in the canoe, and he missed, and he fell in the river. Dude, I didn't see that. This children's pastor ran so fast over that canoe into the water to get that kid out of there. Because I guess crocodiles were really serious. Like, I didn't realize how.
We only ever see them in movies.
We had a spear, so we were ready to set and go. But worst experiences is really as a leader, as a mission trip, your youth or whoever's with you, them having negative outlooks on things.
Oh yeah.
I think that really changes the whole heart of the group, which is sad.
Yeah. And especially, if you're leading and you've invested all this time and effort and money into it and all these resources, and then for them to have a negative outlook, not be appreciative.
Yeah.
Because those experiences are largely based on what you put into them. Mm-hmm. And you were talking earlier about being emboldened. I don't go door to door. I don't hand out gospel tracts and say, do you want to have a relationship with Jesus with strangers? I tend to, when I'm here in Ohio, I build long-term relationships with people and I share my faith, just as it comes up. But on a mission trip, you feel, you really do feel bold enough to do it. So when it comes to getting out of an experience what you put into it, I think that being bold and taking those steps and being willing to share your testimony, to use tools like the Gospel Cube that you had mentioned, or the Wordless Book, or some of those common evangelism tools. If you be bold and you take that step of faith, it ends up being a rewarding experience. In fact, the only time in my life where I met a stranger, talked to him about who God was, and listened to what they had to say, listened to their testimony, led them through a prayer of salvation, and invited them to church later that evening. It was on a mission trip. And this guy, he had just lost his family. His wife had left him and taken the kids, and he couldn't stop drinking. It was a problem that he really struggled with, and he felt so hopeless. And he said, he told us that he was like ready to end his life, and that we had come to his door and stopped that process. Like God had sent us there at that time.
That's amazing.
And it was like truly a miracle. And it was a beautiful thing. And he was just desperately looking for help. God had sent us there. We showed up. I was able to lead him to the Lord. And it was an amazing experience. And to have that mindset of, I'm going to be bold. I'm going to follow God's leading on this trip. That's so important.
It is. There's a lot of times that people are kind of skeptic about, should I really go on the mission trip? Is it worth me going? And so that's the proof of point. God had placed you there for a reason. Yeah. You went on that trip for a reason. Maybe it was only for that experience and that interaction with that man, but he knew that man needed to hear what you said, because if you said it and I said it, it might come off differently to the guy. He might think I'm making fun of him. You might be being serious. And so God placed you there for that reason. And so that's one of the big things that it's really cool when you take multi-generational people, because they know that you're there for a reason and they bring that out to the youth. When they say, you know what, you're here and that's amazing that you did this or you did that. And so it's really cool to have them there, kind of keeping the youth more engaged with what is going on the mission field. I enjoyed that experience being with the older folks, because they were more grateful, because they realize what they have and that they don't have, the people that were there. Sometimes teens can be brats, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So they don't realize what they don't have. In Costa Rica, for some reason, and somehow we had internet at our hotel, which the teens thought was normal. And I was like, this is a new thing to me. Like, I've never been on a mission field and had internet, And so sometimes I could be like that. And so I get kind of upset sometimes when we get pampered by the missionaries. I was in Africa for 3 months, so I knew what it was like to be part of the culture. I was invited to Maasai's, their huts and stuff like that, which is amazing because they don't usually invite people over because they're nomadic and all those kind of things. And so it was really cool to be part of the culture. And so sometimes it sucks whenever you're just going on a week or a week and a half or 2 weeks. You don't always get that experience of being fully immersed into the culture to be able to witness a little bit better to them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So many times they want to give you the best treatment. They want to represent their country well. They want to show you love. And so they pamper you. They put out their best. And yeah, sometimes if it's only a few days, then you only see the best and you don't really get to see the real people that are there.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's definitely the advantage to a longer term trip where you can actually get to experience like an everyday sort of day with those people. Because if I were to think about it, really just step back and evaluate what I've seen as being the most valuable parts of missions, I think that relationship building truly rises to the top. I think it's great to do work trips. For the longest time, Nazarene Church mission trips were called work and witness trips. That's a change that's just recently been made, that they're broadening it because they want to open up for any sort of mission trips. But the idea is work and witness, share your faith, and do a manual labor project. That's always been such a fundamental part of mission trips. And that can be helpful. It can be really great to have a team come in and build something for you. But it could also be great to take that same amount of money that you spent on your flights and instead pay professionals to come in and build that thing for you, right? There could be a more economic, a better, put that in air quotes, a better use of resources if your goal is just accomplishing this task. But when it comes to the relationship building, to know that I got to meet someone and learn their name and sleep in their home and dine at their table, that's something that you can't pay someone else to do. That's something that you can't just send resources to make happen, but you have to physically show up to be able to do that. So I find that to be one of the most crucial, essential, and beneficial parts of mission trips.
What I really liked about the one when I went to Africa is we were thrown out of our comfort zone quite a bit, because Tanzania is mostly Muslims. And so it threw me through a loophole, like, because, with Christians, you sit and you share and you talk about things going on in your life. And it's easier because you follow the same God, you follow Jesus. But when you're with Muslims, it's a little bit different. You have to kind of get used to what they are, or what they believe in and who they are, I should say. And so, when I would hear the siren go off 3 times a day for them to pray, one of the things that challenged me was my faith. It challenged my faith quite a bit, because I realized, like, I'm a Christian. I read the Bible. I pray every day, but I see these Muslims who are very devout to what they believe, that they pray 3 times a day. And it really threw a hook through me, what's going on here? Like, am I really being the Christian that I need to be? How am I going to be a true witness to these people that actually are so devout, that probably more devout than I am to Christianity? How am I going to bring them the gospel? And so that was a really hard thing for me to realize, being in that kind of situation.
That's interesting. there's so many of those sort of instances that you could never plan for, that you just have to be there, be willing to be open to God, to learn whatever he might have to bring your way, and that he could teach you something in a moment that you were never expecting. That's one of those amazing parts of mission trips. And I think that's a really great point that you brought up, to be challenged by their cultures. So often we can think about us going on these trips as we are bringing enlightenment. You know, we're bringing these resources, we're bringing here's the way that we do it. Here, you know, and that can be really haughty, that can be really self-righteous. But to approach it with humility and to say, what can I glean from their culture? What can I glean from their faith or their religion? I feel like there's always more opportunities to grow when it's that mutual exchange.
Right. And I learned from that mission trip that I need not just to prepare, like, you know, my food and, you know, get my shots or anything like that before I go on a mission trip, but I need to prepare spiritually as well. Like, am I ready for this mission trip? Like, a lot of people, they just want to go and they pay the money and they're excited to go, but they're not like ready because they just haven't put effort into it. You know, when you go to a country that speaks Spanish and the Roman Catholic, do you know what they do? What is their rituals? How do they act? And so I feel like, you know, sometimes we fall short when we go into these cross-cultural areas, when we go overseas, because some of us like to go overseas, some like to stay domestically, but when we go overseas to these whole different areas, are we doing our homework and are we spiritually ready for the things that we're about to do? Because we could present the gospel, right? But if we're not devout Christians and are more devout than the Muslims, you know, what good are my words going to be? You know, because, you know, it'll be insignificant, really, to be honest.
Yeah, I find it really interesting that you bring up the comparison of being physically prepared. Just a few episodes ago, Joe was talking about how he wasn't feeling well because he had been getting a whole series of vaccinations. You know, he was not going to take any chances when it came to that physical preparation because he saw potential danger. Yeah, but so many times we go on these mission trips where we believe that we are on a mission from God, for God, to this culture, to this group of people, and we haven't done our homework. Yeah, right. We just don't take it as seriously.
Yeah,
and I don't ever want to say that there's a situation where God can't work, because I know that God can do amazing things when we least expect it. But if we put in some sort of effort, whether that's relationship building, whether that's planning out what we're going to do, whether that's just growing closer to God in that moment, I think that God will bless that God will reward that. Hearing God's voice can be a difficult thing, but the more familiar you become with it, the easier it is to pick up in those moments.
Definitely. And I mean, so world missions is totally like a thing for the Nazarene church, right? We have GSs, which are the people that are in charge of the church. You know, they're like the CEOs, I guess you call them, or whatever.
I always call them the Nazarene popes.
But they're all over the world. We have Eurasia, we have South America, Central America. So they're all over the world. We are worldwide, the Nazarene church. And part of it's because of missions, because of evangelism. That's how we've gotten to places. It's exciting when we get a new country that a Nazarene church gets planted, right? Because that is furthering the gospel. You know, it can be any church, of course, but it's really exciting when your church is growing.
Yes, a sense of ownership.
Looking out, right? You know, it goes back to the beginning of the Church of the Nazarene, where it started as a mission. Like, you know, so we talk about missions and we usually think about overseas missions, but missions is so much broader. You know, like you said, we're changed our name for Work and Witness now to, what was it?
Nazarene Missions.
Nazarene Missions.
It's this term that resonates in everyone's heart, but it leaves it very open-ended.
Yeah. I mean, and our first missionaries were women, which was amazing, that were in Texas, because Pilot, Texas, where we kind of started off at after California, and they would go and they medically help out those who were in Mexico, and they spoke Spanish. And so it's really cool to see the Nazarene history was missions. And so, you know, growing up a missionary or Nazarene myself, you know, I saw how important missions was. And sometimes I do think about, like, is it more important to go overseas or to stay in the States? Because you said you went to Navajo's, a reservation.
Yeah, the reservation.
And you've been overseas. So was there a difference between the two? Did you feel more like God called you to the reservation than over to Chile?
Honestly, I felt much closer to I felt like I was really following God's leading. I felt much closer to the people when we had gone to Chile, because we were working with local pastors and local churches. Our mission trip to the Dominican, it was beautiful. It was a medical missions trip. I felt like I knew what it was like to be Jesus and go into the town and have the people line up to be healed. Like, it was a beautiful experience. It was so cool to be able to help out in that way. And I have no medical training.
Yeah.
So it was literally just a matter of me hanging out with people, being that patient transport to move them from station to station. It was great. But there wasn't that sense of connection that I had with the local church. And same with the Navajo reservation. There was a reservation church, but I didn't get to meet a lot of the people that were a part of that church community.
So like you said, relationships is a big thing to you.
For me, that's everything.
Like,
yeah.
when you were missing that, you were just like, I'm just working here. And so it just was harder for you than, what it was in Chile.
And I think one of the best things about the Church of the Nazarene is when we plant a church in another country, in a region that is perhaps unreached by our denomination, it's not a matter of setting up a site where we can project our culture,
Right.
where we can bring education because we know better. No, we are saying there are brothers and sisters. These are fellow Nazarenes that are part of this community. And it's a symbiotic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
They give something to the greater church, and the greater church gives something to them, and each one of the local churches pours into the big church. And I think that there's so much more respect in that model for each one of those churches.
And what's really great about the church is that we make seminaries as well. We create seminaries in all these different countries because we want the locals to be their own pastors.
Yeah.
We don't want to send Josh to Africa every week and have him preach the gospel, a white guy preaching to the Africans. It's not comfortable. And that's not the whole point of the Nazarene Church and wanting to spread the gospel. They want others to know what the gospel is, and they can be in their local communities. And so having these seminaries, there's one in Nairobi. I know there's one in Singapore as well. They're all over the world. And it's really cool to see that happening because we are training pastors to be better leaders, and they don't have to be American to be better leaders.
Yes. Yeah, that's huge. Yeah. Pursuing God's calling and becoming a leader doesn't mean looking more like the American church. It means looking more like Jesus.
What's really hard sometimes, just talking real quick, what's really hard to me sometimes is not looking at somebody who doesn't speak my language less than me. Have you ever had that before?
Yes.
Like you have to remind yourself. What really helped me out a lot is my brother just moved to France. And he was telling me about how he can't speak French, of course. He doesn't know French. And his son, his name is Miles. He's like 4 years old, 5 years old. He's learning French. And he's like, he knows more French than I do. But so his son now is calling different places, speaking in French for his dad and mom. And so it made me realize, like, okay, because they don't speak the same language doesn't mean they're less educated. That's one of the things you kind of start to think of, a stereotype that you put in your mind. And so when you go to a different country, it's really eye-opening, like, okay, yeah, they're just people, like you said, they're just like us. They're as intelligent as we are, even more, even if they do things differently. Like, construction work is done differently in some places.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean it's worse.
It's not level, but that's okay. Just put it up there,
I mean, some of those brick buildings that they're putting together,
Yeah.
the islands in the Caribbean, those are surviving hurricanes.
Oh, I
and
know,
our houses will fall
seriously.
flat, So
they build
I don't
all
want to
that stuff
judge.
10 and like it stays up. I don't know how it does that. But so it's really cool to have that experience and to see the generosity too of the people whenever you go there. I remember a time when we had to clean out a well, a cistern is what they call it, where they actually go to the well. And it was a huge thing and the community used it, right? And we cleaned it out because it was nasty in there. But when you clean it out, you have to get everything out of it, all the water out of it, right, to clean it. And then you have to find water to put in it. And we didn't have the budget to put more water in it. And so, one of our guys was a Freemason. I shouldn't say that on the air, but he was a Freemason. Nazarenes aren't allowed to be Freemasons.
It's in the handbook.
It's in the handbook. But he was a Freemason, and he shook this guy's hand a certain way. I don't know how they do it. It's kind of like Eagle Scouts. You're an Eagle Scout too.
Oh yeah.
We shake a certain way, and you know you're an Eagle
We
Scout.
could model it right now for the YouTube audience, but
I forget how
we got to keep it a secret.
Yeah. So they shook hands, and then all of a sudden we had free water. And because it wasn't a guy on the mission trip, it was somebody that was there that was being generous to his own community. So it was really cool that sometimes when you're there, you bring that out, where they start to be generous to each other.
Yeah.
So you start a chain reaction sometimes when you're there, not because of whatever you do all the time. It's just because you're there and you're creating this environment of giving. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's that pay it forward mentality.
Mm-hmm.
You see this group of strangers that comes in is willing to be generous, and it sparks something in you. Yeah, I think one of the greatest things that we do as a local church community, and I'm really proud to say that our whole region of the Nazarene Church did it this year, is our Serve Day. That's all about community outreach, and it can be the simplest projects, or it can be these elaborate, wildly generous projects, and everything in between. And when we do those things, it inspires other people. And it always warms my heart to see all the different churches, all the different independent churches and denominations in our area here in the Canton area, that all through the summer have their serve days every couple of weeks. Yeah. And I see these people in matching t-shirts here and there, so and cool, each one of them representing different churches. And I'm always so proud to think that, that's my brother and sister.
Yeah. That's so cool. And, it's really cool when it's local, like Canton local, because, missions is even closer to the church, because there's churches that give, food pantries. That's a big thing. Some people give on Thanksgiving, they give food to the people that need some food and can't afford it on Thanksgiving, because it's a big meal, right?
Yeah.
If you eat like me, I mean, it's a big meal. You got to have at least 3 turkeys and 2 hams, I mean, it's just a lot of food. And so, or people give school supplies to people. And so it's really cool to have that. Now, I don't know, Josh, what do you think? Do you think missions is really important in church growth? Because we do some church missions here. Like, we do those certain things. We even do a little bit more than that. But do you think that's really important to the church growing, or the health of the church, maybe?
Yes. Okay. So I think you throwing out those two terms is really great, because I think a lot of times we think about growing when it comes to 2 metrics. We think about money and we think about size. And we think about the number of people coming and the amount of resources that the church has. And a lot of times we can hear calls to grow, whether it's from the scriptures or from church leaders, and we think, okay, that means more people, more resources, more buildings. But I think that a lot of times growing can be becoming stronger. I think about the branches of a tree that don't always just grow as far out from the tree as they can, but they spread out. Or I think about the vines, the small branches of a vine that just wrap further and further around what they're clinging to. And I think so many times we can grow in a way that doesn't make us bigger, but it makes us sturdier and it makes us stronger as a community. And so when it comes to that sort of healthy growth, whether it's big, whether it's inward, but that continued growth, I think missions is essential for it. Because I think the fundamental idea of missions is looking beyond yourself. So many times we come to church and we say, what does the Bible have that can help me out? What's the preacher going to say that's going to help me out? But with missions, we say, hey, we're going to take these resources, we're going to take this time, and it's not about you. It's about the people around you.
Yeah, and it pushes us to actually act out our faith, right?
Yeah.
Rather than consuming, just pushing that out and showing people our faith, that's so awesome. Yeah. I think you're right on with the branches. I like that analogy that you did with the branches.
It's not my analogy, it's Jesus's.
I know. I thought of the scripture when you were saying that. I was like, well, we'll let him have this one. But yeah, so I mean, there's all types of forms of missions. And so it's really amazing to be part of that, because you see all different types of things that happen in mission trips or even missions locally. And we have personal stories of people that we were able to lead to Christ, people we were able to help out, people that came to us because they're in a time where they can't figure things out. Missions could be as easy as somebody coming on a Sunday morning to the church and they don't know what they're going to do next. I mean, just, they came in our front door, which is kind of contrary to what missions is going out. But at the same time, being that person, I feel like somebody who's missional will gravitate toward that person and know how to act around that person. So when you're exposed to missions more, it's not going to be uncomfortable for you to be able to talk to that stranger.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
bring hope to that person. I feel like when I think about health of the people, like, are they ready to talk to other people, or are they just consume? If we do too much consuming, like, it may grow the church, but if we do too much consuming, we won't know how to preach to others. We won't know how to reach out to others about our faith.
Like anything in life, it's about preparation. It's about your mindset. And so, yeah, you had just thrown this term out real quick, but I think it's worth taking the time to step back and look at that missional mindset. To be a missional person is to be a person who is prepared, a person who is bold, to be able to approach someone, to be outward focused. So many times I see first-time guests coming to church, and I have to think to myself, okay, what do I say to them? How do I introduce myself? And sometimes I get ashamed because I'm like, I don't know what to do in this moment. I feel unprepared. I haven't done this in a little while.
You know what I always get scared of when I see a first-time guest is they were there the previous week and I forgot them, or they already introduced themselves to me. I'm like, oh,
it's like worst case scenario.
Sorry. Like, I didn't remember.
But I think that missional mindset is willing to risk that embarrassment
it is.
and go for it. I think of someone like Joe who prompted this trip with Dan to go to Africa, and he's been out of the country before. One of his greatest testimonies is about his time in Eastern Europe.
Ukraine.
Right? Yeah, in Ukraine, like in the middle of the war.
Crazy.
And Joe doesn't just have that missional mindset, that missional attitude when he's in those crazy circumstances. He has it week in and week out. He has people that come to the church that they need some help, and he doesn't just say, okay, like, let's go get you some gas, let's get you some food and get you out of here. He takes the time to ask them questions and listen to their story and figure out what's going on with them and like genuinely care about them. Yeah. He has that missional mindset all the time.
And that's amazing, isn't it?
Oh, I'm so inspired.
Yeah.
I'm low-key jealous, but for the most part, I'm inspired and proud of him.
No, that's so cool to have somebody to look up to about that.
Yes.
Like, you need to have somebody in your life that you see that their heart is that way, and you are like, you know what? I need to step it up a little bit. You know, as a youth pastor, I better step it up a little bit, at least, you know, be a little bit more missional minded. And so, I mean, in student ministry, it's the same thing. Like, you just get scared when a new student comes in, even though you're a youth pastor and they're like, oh, you're a youth pastor. I still get scared. I'm like, hello, what is your name? You know, I try not to be creepy. I'm 40 years old, and, you know, so I try not to be creepy around the little kids, you know. But yeah, you have to, you know, you have to engage with them. And so it's very missional to be a youth pastor because their culture is definitely not like my culture. I grew up in the 1900s, as they would say. And so my culture is definitely not theirs. I try to say words that they say, and then they yell at me about saying it. Like, I'm like, dude, that's tight. And they're like, don't say that again. I will say, hey, man, you got the Riz. They're like, do you even know what that means? I was like, not really.
There is a new lexicon of slang with every new school year. And so you gotta
bet.
I think intergenerational missions, and you've mentioned it a couple times, I think that is a bridge that you have to be very intentional about building and fostering and maintaining. And you can see that between members of a team that are going on the trip, or you can see it between the person who's going on the trip and who is being ministered to, or just in the local church context. In beyond church, when you are in your workplace or when you're at school, like the relationship intergenerationally, it really takes that selfless, missional mindset to be able to foster relationships across that divide.
So one question I want to ask you, maybe we'll end with this question, I don't know, is what if you have somebody in your church, they have a great heart, they have a heart for Jesus, they'll do stuff locally, but they say, I don't want to go on overseas mission trips or away from their community because I don't think that's godly.
I've heard a lot of different criticisms against global missions, and some of them feel really valid, some of them don't. Some of the ones that have resonated with me are the idea of being economic, being good steward of resources. People that say, oh, for all the money that you spent on your hotel, on your flights, what a waste of money. You could have used it to help the people out in a different way. You could have used it locally to help our community. Another criticism that feels really valid is, again, a criticism of this American exceptionalism, the idea that we have to go somewhere and make them more like the American church in order to make them more like Jesus. We falsely conflate the two. We think that we're bringing them the gold that they couldn't find on their own. And I think we can be very prone to do that as well. Recently, something that really weighed heavy on me was at a recent missions conference, hearing someone share a statistic that the number of missionaries from other countries into the United States has gone up hundreds, like 200 or 300%. And I heard so many people in the audience go, "Oh no, oh how terrible, how sad." And I thought to myself, that's amazing that other people are willing to come here because they care for us, that they are Christians and they see the good news is so important that they want to bring it to anyone, even people in America that are lost. And we just have this American exceptionalism in our mind. And for some people it can be really obvious, for some people it can be really subtle. And we just think that our way is closer to God. And so that's what we need to bring. And so I think there definitely are some healthy criticisms, some healthy concerns to raise when it comes to global missions. It feels like a cop-out answer, but my response would be, have you been on a global mission trip? Have you been on an international or even national outside of the States? Have you experienced it?
I think though, like when we give that answer, people find it like a selfish answer. You know what I mean? Like, well, you're the one getting anything out of it. You know what I mean? And I feel like,
That's fair.
you know, when you bring that up, they're like, well, why do they need you? All these kind of things, you know, because I had to deal with that a little bit with our Costa Rica trip, not too much, but there was people that didn't want to go because they just didn't feel like we had to go overseas to be missional. They felt like we could do that over here. And it's amazing because they do participate in our local church. They do missional things here, but they just have this thing that they won't go anywhere across, you know, the seas. Like they just won't go overseas. They'll stay in America, but they won't go overseas. And so when I said that response, they felt like I was very selfish because I'm like, you know, it's amazing to go over there. And I said, well, we have resources that people don't have. You know, America is pretty rich, right?
Sure.
And we have resources that other people can't do. And so the one thing I do like about how the Nazarene Church does it is we don't just go over there and spend the money and, you know, do the work ourselves, but we often employ people who are from that community to help do it. We would buy the products from their community to do that work. All we are is just extra hands, to be honest. You know, we're like that 5-year-old trying to trim the lawn. Like, you know, we're trying, but we're not really good at it. We don't know what we're doing. You know what I mean? And so that part of work and witness, it is crucial that we do that because I think we have resources to be able to do it. Sometimes we have people that know better how to do things like architecture. People can go over there. We have one guy here that goes on oversee mission trips that is really good at electric. Running electric. He does an amazing job, and he is able to go through a building and help out where they were needing some help.
I had mentioned earlier about the medical mission trip, and there were so many doctors that were there, or nurses, people that worked professionally in that field, and they said, "Hey, I have this resource. There's people in this community that need it. I'm gonna go there." It was a Doctors Without Borders, but you know, sharing the gospel as well.
And so like when you take somebody's electrician or a doctor in that community that they don't have all those people, or they have to pay a lot to get those people there, you know, we're bringing a resource that's not monetary, but somebody that can help in that or just be able to help in that aspect quite a bit.
So I think one of the important responses when you receive criticism or when you're in a conversation that's being real honest and wants to evaluate, is this worth our time? Is this worth our money? To bring up that it's multifaceted, that, in one way we're providing resources, but in another way, it is a little bit selfish. Like, I'm getting something from it. Whoever comes on this trip is getting something from it. And that's not a bad thing. I think it develops us as individuals. Like, you and I have shared a lot throughout this episode about the positive experiences we've had on these trips and formed in ways that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And sure, that can come across selfish, but I think that it's a beautiful thing to grow cross-culturally, to experience the world. It brings humility to us. It helps us to be more understanding and empathetic to others. So yeah, I do think you definitely grow as an individual. But again, I just want to come back to this point of relationships.
Right.
I think that if a person goes on a mission trip and they come back and they don't have if you're an old person, Facebook friends, if you're a younger person, if you don't have a new person that you're texting or that you're following on socials, like, I think you've missed out on something crucial. If you don't have some sort of pen pal, if you don't have a name and a face that you can say, yes, that is a person that I love and care about, that's in another culture, that speaks another language, that attends a church that I may never go back to, but I still feel that connection with them. If you go on this awesome trip that you paid all this money and did all this time and sacrifice for, and you don't have a new relationship coming out of it, I would look at that and say, hey, you might have missed something. Like, I don't want to say it's a failure, because I said God can use anything, but I think that is the goal, the thing that we can't forget about when we're participating in missions.
No, definitely not. And when we go overseas, when we go to our mission trips, yeah, it's a little bit selfish. It's like vacation, right? But the thing is, you're going on vacation, vacation with air quotes, right? But you're dedicating that time to God. Like, you're dedicating all the things that you're going to do to God. Now, it's funny because some people say, well, I'll suffer in Hawaii for Jesus, or I'll suffer somewhere else. But it's really a cool thing when somebody signs up to go on a mission trip that has no desire to be there whatsoever. You know what I mean? I think on my last mission trip, somebody never thought they would ever go to Costa Rica. They never desired to go there. And so, that's definitely a God pushing them, his Spirit's pushing them. I get fearful sometimes that people sign up to go on a mission trip because they feel like it's a vacation rather than feeling God's Spirit leading them there. I think we get excited about a place. And I think one of the things, as I talked about preparation, one of the things that we need to prepare is, God, do you really want me to go? Maybe that's a hard question because sometimes we are selfish. We want to go because we want to be there. God, is it really you that wants me to go? So just to share a personal story real quick is when Joe mentioned the Africa trip, dude, I was stoked. And so me and Joe initially started planning it out, right?
Yeah. I
was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. I know Swahili. And, I went on about it. I told my wife, I was like, this is going to be so cool, and so I just messed up all the audio, I'm sure. But I was so excited about it. And then I came to the realistic idea of, okay, do I have enough PTO time to get off of work? Is my wife cool with this? How am I going to come up with the money? All these kind of things. And so there were some things that were kinks, where I could have probably worked through it. But Joe called me one morning. He's like, Jimmy, I don't know how to say this. And he just told me point blank, I don't think you should go. I don't think it's in the cards right now. He's like, I'm going to go with Dan. Dan's really going to be there with me. He's like, I just don't know. A part of me was hurt because I really did want to go. But then a part of me was like listening to God's Spirit and saying, you know what? I don't think I'm supposed to go this time. And I think it's really hard when you realize you want to go on a trip, but you realize, you know what, God's not calling me to this trip right now. And so I think that's hard because we are selfish, right? But we need to listen to God's Spirit, and we need to listen to the Holy Spirit when it comes to where we need to be at, And so when you were called to Chile, I'd like to say that now, when you were called to Chile and you had that encounter with that man, you were led there by the Spirit. When I was in Africa and I was preaching to little kids, and being with the kindergartners, I did children's ministry over there, which was amazing. And so when I was teaching them, I felt God's Spirit with me there. When I went to heal people, it was amazing. When I showed the Jesus video, it was amazing. I felt like God's presence was there with me the whole time because he led me there. And so I think that makes the whole trip too. Like, are you listening to God's voice? Are you being led by the Holy Spirit? And if you are, things are going to happen amazingly. You can prepare for so much, but when you're following God's Spirit, there's going to be things that you encounter that you would never prepare for, that God has already placed on that trip for you because he has you there for a reason.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
I love that. Yeah, God goes ahead. God prepares the hearts of the people there. God prepares our hearts, and God is able to do something. In the end, we're just tools that he uses to accomplish his mission.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Jimmy, for sharing about your mission experiences.
Yeah, I had a fun time.
As I said, I'm really looking forward to Joe coming back and talking about what happened on his trip. But I think that's a really good place to leave, to just be willing to trust God, to let God do his thing. And so for anyone who's watching, if you feel called to go overseas, do it. If you feel called to serve in your local community, do it. If you've always thought about going and serving in a soup kitchen, and that's just an idea that has just been thrown out there and you've never actually done it, go do it.
Yeah.
That missional mentality is just saying, hey, I'm going to get up and I'm going to literally just go do it. And so I would encourage anyone who's watching to just do it. If you guys have any thoughts, any questions, if you want to hear some more stories, you can leave comments. You can write into us, podcast@cantonazarene.com. We would love to hear from you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.